Hi, Haunted family. Welcome back to another episode. If you like what you've been hearing, don't forget to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. We appreciate it. We appreciate it so much that when we finally hit the 1,000 subscriber mark, we'll be doing a giveaway. You'll want to be in on that. It's estimated that about 20% of the population here in the U.S. live in apartments. Many years ago, somebody who claimed to be an expert in the paranormal told me that apartments, house trailers, basically anything that wasn't a single family home couldn't be haunted. Yeah, I thought that was a little weird too. For some reason, I was thinking on that this week, so I pulled together a collection of true paranormal stories from people who live in apartments. Well, I've never personally lived in an apartment. I lived in a college dorm room, so that's similar, kind of the same. Sit back and enjoy the show. This happened to one of my aunts and her husband over 40 years ago in Salem, Massachusetts. My aunt and uncle and their infant daughter moved into a house in Salem that had been divided into two apartments. When you entered the front door, there was a door to the basement directly in front of you. This door was padlocked shut. Their apartment door was to their left, and their neighbor's door was to the right. Everything began with a knocking sound coming from under the floor of their bedroom. This continued until my uncle became so annoyed that he broke the lock to the basement, determined to find what was causing the noise. When he opened the door, the stairwell leading down to the basement was full of cobwebs, all undisturbed. No one could have been down there without leaving a trace. Next, the gas knobs on the stove would turn themselves on. My aunt would smell gas, find the knobs turned on, turn them off, and a while later find them on again. Another time my uncle was laying in bed. He felt someone lay down on the bed next to him. He thought it was my aunt, but when he opened his eyes, there was no one there. There was, however, an indentation on the bed, as if a body was laying next to him. He then felt whatever it was get up, and he watched as the indentation disappeared on the bed. Now, me personally, I would have been out of there long before this, but what happened next was the final blow for them. My uncle was at work, and my aunt was doing laundry. My cousin was still an infant at the time, and in her bassinet. My aunt locked the front door and moved the baby's bassinet close to an open window so she could hear the baby while she was outside hanging the laundry out to dry. She left the back door unlocked. While hanging close, she heard the baby cry and went to go inside to check on her. The back door was now locked. She looked through the window and saw the baby was no longer next to the window. The bassinet had been moved. It was now in the entrance to the building, right next to the basement door, which was now open. She ran to the front door and tried to get in, but couldn't. She went to the neighbor's house to get help, just as my uncle got home. The baby was fine, but they were not staying in that house for another minute. They moved out that night and came back the next day for the rest of their belongings, and they moved into a new apartment. My aunt was talking with one of their new neighbors, and they were discussing places that they had lived. My aunt mentioned to the new neighbors that she wouldn't believe all the things they'd went through at their previous apartment, and proceeded to tell her about their experiences. The neighbor listened to her story, and then looked her straight in the face and said, "Of course I believed you. We moved out of that same apartment months ago." Another aunt and uncle, also in Salem, lived in a building that had several small apartments in it. Strange things happened to them from the moment they moved in, but nothing that really bothered them much. A calendar and pictures would turn around and face the wall while they would be gone. Then, one evening, my uncle awoke to see a man sitting in the chair next to his side of the bed. He was about to yell at the intruder when he noticed that he could see the street light from outside shining through the man. He said that the man was dressed in old clothing and wore a stovepipe hat. He could see every feature on the man's face. He closed his eyes, and when he looked again, the man was gone. The next morning, he asked my aunt if she had seen anything, and she said that she hadn't. She asked what he had seen, and he told her about the man. She told him he was probably just dreaming. My uncle saw the man a few more times, and then one day, while talking to their landlord, he found out that the place had once been a pencil factory and had belonged to the landlord's family for many years. He showed my uncle a picture of the factory, and his employees all standing outside. There in the picture was the man my uncle had seen sitting in the chair beside him. He asked the landlord if he knew that man in the stovepipe hat in the picture, and the landlord said yes. That's one of my ancestors. He owned the factory. I've always believed in ghosts, and now that I live in a 100-year-old building, I especially believe in ghosts. I moved in with my boyfriend a year and a half ago. The night I moved in, I had an experience that was a bit unnerving in the light of day. I received a call from a friend that evening, and she asked if I could take her and her kids to the airport that morning. I said sure, and I set my alarm to go off at 5 a.m. so I could go get her and get her to the airport in time. My alarm went off, but I was so tired from the move that I forgot why it was going off and fell right back to sleep. An hour later, I felt the bed shaking, as if someone was trying to get me up. I remember thinking, what now? And fell back to sleep, only to be woken up 20 minutes later by the phone ringing. My friend said that she would just get a ride from her sister. After the call, I looked over to the kitchen and saw a gray figure in the door that seemed to be shaking his head at me. I immediately knew that this spirit had tried to wake me up so that I could keep my promise to my friend. He seemed to have the best of intentions, and I didn't see him again after that, which is sad because he seemed very friendly. We then moved down to the second floor, and I soon found that we have a ghost there too. This one likes to pace up and down our short hallway between the door and the living room. He also paces along the southwest wall of the living room sometimes. I get the impression that this man, in a brown pinstripe suit and bowler hat, and he has a mustache and deep-set eyes. He stands about my height, which is about 5'8". When we first moved in, he had paced the hallway, coming further and further into the living room. It's a studio apartment, so the living room is also the bedroom. He seemed highly agitated. My boyfriend saw him more than I did, and a few times he would arrive home from work, and the top deadbolt would be locked. We never use that lock, as it's very difficult to open with a key from the outside. My boyfriend works graveyard shift at a 24-hour store, and I'm alone at night, about 4 nights a week. One night I noticed that he was coming further and further out into the living room, and he was giving off vibes that were not friendly. I had had it just about now, and looked at the hallway and said, "Listen, it's the 2000s. It's not 1900 or 1800 or whatever year you think it is. Times have changed, and it's okay for people to live together without being married, so lay off." I felt a feeling of surprise from the hallway, and have not had a problem with him since. I related this to the apartment manager, with whom we have become really good friends, and she said that she has seen him too. And I was right about my impressions of what he looks like, as that is who she has seen in our place, when her son lived in our apartment. She's also said that she's seen him in the hallway outside of our apartment door. She said there's several ghosts in the building, and that she's not surprised to hear stories about them. She's had a few experiences since she's moved in and taken over the position as manager. It's definitely an interesting place to live. We inherited an old apartment from our grandfather, and 2 years after his death, our family moved in. The fact is that it was okay in the beginning. Weird things started happening soon after my dad was transferred to another town, and my parents left me and my sister in the apartment. During the day, we'd hear noises coming from the ceiling, and we wondered what the neighbors upstairs were up to. We didn't give them much thought until we started hearing them in the middle of the night. It sounded as if someone was dragging chairs and tables around the apartment. We knew our upstairs neighbors. They were an old couple, and had one son who occasionally paid them a visit. One night the noise was so wild that we decided to run upstairs and complain about it. I rang the bell several times, banged on the door. No one answered it. Apparently no one was home. The situation went on for months, and finally we talked to our neighbors. The old lady was baffled. She claimed she would never do such a thing. Anyone who came into our home could hear the noises. One morning, my maid was working in the kitchen when she heard someone open the living room door and walk out into the hallway. She was scared to death, but never thought it would be a ghost. She quickly took a knife out and searched the whole apartment for a burglar. Again, there was no one there. It was not uncommon to sense someone watching us. Never see someone, just feel the presence. Once I was writing a paper, and I clearly felt someone behind me. I turned around and saw nobody. My sister was so afraid to stay alone in the apartment that she would wait for me downstairs. The most frightening thing was yet to come. We were sleeping in our bedrooms when we heard banging inside my closet. The bangings were so loud that I woke up and jumped out of my bed immediately, thinking the shelves inside had tumbled. When we opened the door, we saw nothing. The closet was in the corner of the room, and we didn't have neighbors next door. It couldn't have come from outside. The noises were so real that we didn't doubt where they were. There was definitely noises coming from inside the closet. When we sensed someone around us, we didn't wonder if they were ghosts because the whole thing was so real. The ghost idea only dawned on us sometime after all the incidences. After the banging in the closet, I grabbed my mattress and I slept on the floor of my sister's room. The next day, I went to church and I brought home some holy water, which I sprinkled all over the place. This calmed things down for a while. A year later, we moved out, and we heard that the family who bought it moved out a year later. Several years ago, my husband, infant son, and I moved into our very first apartment in San Antonio, Texas. It was nice, and was our very first place of our own. We were so excited. Everything was fine until 3 months later, when it was broken into. We signed a 6-month lease, so we had to wait for the lease to be up to move. The apartment manager was nice enough to move us into a different apartment upstairs as we were renewed for another 6 months on our lease. This is where strange things started happening. I never saw or heard anything, but I always felt cold, like I was being watched, and strange things started happening, mostly every time my son and I were alone. The first event happened when my husband was home, but was not in the same room. I was in my son's room on the carpet playing with him, while my husband was in the living room watching TV. My son's room, on top of the dresser, sat a Rugrats piggy bank. It was one of those that moved and played the Rugrats theme song whenever a coin was inserted, or if the button was pressed. We were nowhere near this thing, and all of a sudden it started playing. I freaked out. Needless to say, I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move a muscle. I got chills and couldn't speak for a few minutes after it happened. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. My son was too little to think anything about it, and he just kept playing. I called out to my husband and told him what happened, and he said there was probably something mechanically wrong with the bank. No big deal, so I shrugged it off. The next event happened while my husband was at school in the evening, so I was home alone with my son. He was about 14 months old and walking. I was in my room, and he was playing in his. Suddenly, he came running into my room, crying. He took my hand and was leading me back into his room, like he wanted to show me something. He didn't talk. He just pointed to the corner of his room, next to his dresser, the Rugrats piggy bank, and just grunted, like he was pointing out something to me. I didn't see anything, and he kept pointing and grunting. He seemed scared. After that, I started to think he saw something that I could not, and that the place maybe was haunted. There were times my husband would stay out late with his friends while I was home, so I kept the chain lock on the door unlocked so that he could get in and I wouldn't have to get up out of bed to let him in. But many times when he'd get home, he'd find the chain in its place, locking the door, when I knew that before I went to bed, I had to remove the chain lock. Another time, I was getting ready for work in my bedroom. Again, I was alone. My husband was already at work. My son was still asleep. I had my bedroom door closed, but not all the way. Something made me turn around and look, and I saw it moving slightly, as if someone was on the other side, looking through the crack. But it didn't open any more than it was. I thought the door was going to fly open at any second, but it didn't. I was so scared, I tried to ignore it and go back to what I was doing. Thank God we moved out right after our lease was up.